and welcome to Debate. I'm Marcia Hashemi. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, Russian military forces have entered the Crimea area of Ukraine, and the interim Ukrainian government says that the Russian move should be equated with a declaration of war on Ukraine. However, Moscow says it is protecting ethnic Russians and its interests in the region.
The Crimean Peninsula, the main flashpoint in Ukraine's crisis. Russian forces have been active in the autonomous region over the past few days. The Russian military is deploying more troops there. The build-up came after the newly elected leader of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, appealed to President Putin for help to ensure peace. Putin says Moscow reserves the right to protect its interests and those of Russian speakers in Ukraine. Crimea is viewed as a strategic region, being the most densely Russian-populated area in Ukraine. More than two-thirds of the people there regard Russian as their native tongue. The region hosts Russia's Black Sea Fleet. An estimated 30% of Europe's natural gas pumped from Russia is also transported through pipelines under Crimea. Russia's moves in Crimea have drawn strong condemnation from authorities in Kiev and Western countries who want closer ties with Ukraine. Kiev has ordered a full military mobilization and called on Western countries to take action against Moscow.
Today, states that were guarantors of the security of Ukraine must fulfill their obligations. And today, the whole world, civilized world, that is supporting Ukraine must take real steps in order to normalize the situation and cease an attempt of military aggression against our country.
US Secretary of State John Kerry warned that Russia could be ejected from the group of 8 developed nations.
Russia has engaged in a military act of aggression against another country.
US President Barack Obama said Russian troop deployments are a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. The UK joined the US, France and Canada and suspended participation in preparatory meetings for the June G8 meeting in the Russian city of Sochi.
Very concerned by reports this morning of escalating tension. We will also continue to urge the Russians to speak directly to the Ukrainians through ministers, through military channels.
Moscow seems defiant despite all the reactions. The Kremlin believes there are real threats to the life and health of Russian citizens and compatriots on Ukrainian territory. The world is now waiting to see where the row over Ukraine will lead.
I'd like to welcome my guest to the program. Out of Washington, Congressional Defense Policy Advisor, Mr. Frederick Peterson. And out of Orlando, Florida, former American intelligence linguist, Mr. Scott Ricard. Thank you both for being with us. I want to start it off, though, with our correspondent in Simferopol, Katerina, so sorry about that, Kuznetsova. We're going to start off with her and give us the latest on the situation in general. That has taken place, of course, today has been another fast-moving day.
Hello, yes, we're reporting from Simferopol, and we just came back from the Simferopol City Center, Verkhovna Rada. There is a concert going on right now in Verkhovna Rada, and there are a lot of Russian people waving the flags there, and people say that it's not a war, nothing is wrong. But of course, they're waiting for tomorrow meeting in Kiev, the meeting of NATO, waiting for the decision to be made, because for now, it's a lot of uncertainty for them.
Well, Katerina, what are they expecting? You talked about the meeting of NATO tomorrow. Tell me the perspectives right now on the ground. You say that they're not concerned, they don't feel like it's a war. However, are they saying anything about the possibilities of the result of this NATO gathering tomorrow?
Well, locals at Simferopol, of course, they can never know for sure. So they just hope for peace. They hope for safety. They say they want to expect peace at least. But a lot of people are scared, of course. They say that you never know what's going to happen because many people in Crimea, Russian speakers, they say that, you know, we want it to be this way. We just don't want any separation. Of course, we want to keep our region region, but at the same time, you know, that Russian military men are here. They're not doing any harm. And by the way, people are also taking pictures with this Russian military men. There are a lot of people who just approach them to take a picture because it's something unusual for them to see so many armed men on the streets of Simferopol.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that update. Katerina Kosnesova, our press correspondent on the ground there. Well, let's cross over to Washington and get Frederick Peterson and on this discussion. Your take, sir. Now, you just heard our correspondent basically say that the people of that region in general actually want the Russian troops in that area. Your take in general, sir, on why Russia has sent troops and if they have the right to do so in your perspective.
Well, absolutely, they do not have the right, and in fact, they signed a treaty. They do not have a right to invade another country in direct violation of agreements that they gave, and we gave security agreements to the Ukraine under President Clinton back in 1994 in exchange for the Ukraine, a free Ukraine, giving up their nuclear weapons, giving them back, in fact, to the Soviet Union at that time, or to Russia, in order to keep them safe and to denuclearize and de-escalate tensions in that area. You might note that the people of the entire Ukraine, including the Russian-speaking regions of that country, voted for independence. Voted for independence. They still yearn for independence. They have been guaranteed independence, signed by both Russia and the United States and the United Kingdom. And this is we should not underestimate in any way the tremendous dangers that exist in that region. Okay. And the precipitous action on the part of Putin has looked President Obama in the eye and found someone falling very short of the measure of someone.
Okay. Had a little audio difficulty. Let's switch over to Orlando and get to Mr. Scott Ricard in on this discussion. Your take, sir. Now, our guests in Washington have basically said that the Russians have absolutely no right to be in Ukraine. Your take, Mr. Ricard.
Well, it's typical coming out of Frederick Peterson. He's obviously had a lifetime of supporting the State Department rhetoric. No doubt there were some referendums in the early 90s that did cause a major change in the Ukraine. That was, a benefit to the people there. At the same time, a lot of the individuals that were living up in the Russian central area that were really moved as a part of World War II were also allowed to return to the Crimea and Ukrainian regions. Now, you have to take a look at Ukraine. It's 50 million people that live in this country, and about 60% are Russian. And outside of that, there's probably only about maybe 12 to 20 or 15% that are in the Crimean Tatar range. So this is a small minority of the individuals in the Ukraine that did actually have some protests, some small protests in Kiev that were very violent. These protests were extremely violent. There was, lots of Molotov cocktails, a lot of activity going on that was, being supported by the outside, by the West. The West has invested over $5 billion in the U.S. government alone, alongside of, what Victoria Nuland was talking about and got caught, talking online with the ambassador from the Ukraine. The U.S. has been orchestrating this overthrow in the Ukraine for quite some time. And you have individuals, the founder of eBay. You've got Pierre Omidyar, who's invested money alongside George Soros. So this is a scenario that has been played out here for several years in creating what they call an uprising that has been fabricated by the West. Now, the reasons for doing this are purely economic and geopolitical. The West has been trying to pull the Ukraine as well as other former Soviet states into NATO At the same time, they're also trying to pull them into the European Union. And many people in the European Union don't even want the Ukraine in. It's actually a legacy for them because they're getting yet another IMF failing state. This particular
let's look at that. Okay, Mr. Ricard, you just brought up something. You said that many people in the European Union really do not want them in the European Union because of the economic situation in general. In the EU, in general, why is the West, not only the Europeans, but also we see the Americans, as you've just talked about, Victoria Nuland, and that leaked conversation, though the Americans continue to deny that they have anything to do with the situation in Ukraine. However, why is it so important, let's say for Washington, to be so involved in the situation in Ukraine?
That's a great question. I mean, what you have here is you have the Ukraine has been taking quite a bit of loans from the IMF. The gentleman that they have running as a quote-unquote prime minister now, their man in office, he's been, basically the finance minister and orchestrating a lot of, very unhealthy and very criminal-based loans coming out of the IMF. So they're going to have to implement some sort of austerity plans. And so that's what they're looking to do. They can financially cripple Russia at the same time and also create another payment state for the failed IMF global financial debacle. And what they're looking at as well is it is a strategic area. I mean, this area is heavily strategic. You look at the port where you just had your first reporter coming out of. That port is the most strategic port for the Russians in the south of Russia. And taking away that port also weakens Russia, whereby, it is a good distraction for Russia. They're actually having some pushback from Russia in Syria, and this would be a great distraction. It would weaken Russia even further and make the West more successful in their endeavors against both Syria and Iran.
Let me turn back to Washington. Let me get Mr. Peterson back in on this, Mr. Ricard. Mr. Peterson, looking at the situation, and because the United States says it's extremely troubling, the current situation that is taking place. However, if we go back right prior to what some would even call a coup or whatever you want to call it, a collapse of the previous government, we have seen that both sides were actually involved in an agreement. They had signed the agreement. The opposition had signed the agreement. So why all of a sudden the turnaround? If they had signed the agreement, basically as far as sharing as far as with like a coalition government, and also ultimately early elections in the Ukraine. So upon that agreement, then why all of a sudden all of this happened? Couldn't this violence and this tension have been prevented?
Well, I think unwittingly, your other guest hit upon a truth, and that is that the Russians have covetous interests on a free Ukraine. They don't want a free Ukraine. They're attempting to reassert a regional hegemony. This has been going on since back during the Crimean War in the 1850s, a long, long time ago. That war resulted in the most huge loss of human life to take place between the Napoleonic Wars and World War I, which also arose from this region in Serbia. And we are tiptoeing on the threshold of a cataclysm. I believe that Putin has looked at President Obama and found someone who will not stand up. We have a macho man meeting the marshmallow. And we have Obama just flippantly throwing out red lines, which turn to pink haze, which turn to yellow puddles on the floor.
Let me just look at that point you just made, Mr. Peterson. What do you think that President Obama, sir, what do you think that President Obama should be doing that he is not doing right now?
He should not be making, first of all, he should be attending his own national security briefings, which he did not attend yesterday, utterly, inexplicably canceled out, walked out on his own national, never showed up to his own national security briefing. He is, not that he is doing the wrong things, he's not doing anything. He is not acting as a leader. He is acting as a disinterested party, certainly not taking account of the treaties that we have, of the very delicate issues that we have, and of the personality of a Putin who has had, as Russia has had for many years, designs on regional hegemony and is seeking to recapture, reestablish a Russian, as they did in Georgia.
Okay.
In in 2008.
Mr. Ricard, your take on our guest in Washington, designs on regional hegemony, talking about Russia, and yet, as you had mentioned earlier, the United States is very, very much involved in this situation. Your perspective on Russia and why Russia is doing what it is it because of actually the proximity to its own country, and as far as looking at it from a security perspective, or how do you see it?
Well, obviously, it's a national security perspective,
Proximity.
both from a commercial perspective. Many of the actual pipelines for the taking gas to Europe, as well as transportation lines, and from a military perspective, Crimea has been, because of its the nature of its geography, it's been an extremely strategic military location for centuries, as Mr. Peterson describes. But the more important thing is you talk about hegemony and you talk about responsibility. I mean, the Americans marched through Afghanistan and basically militarized jihad in the 80s and have been dealing with that ever since. And they have taken no accountability for that. In fact, they've taken advantage of it to expand their hegemony, not just in that region, but in other regions throughout Africa and the Middle East. So talk about expanding hegemony. I think, take a look in the mirror, Mr. Peterson. There's quite a bit that you have not noticed and talked about. At the same time, there's a whole lot going on from the criminal perspective. You have to look at guys like Semyon Mogilevich, who's on the FBI's most wanted list. And I highly recommend that you look at this, Mr. Peterson. I'll be in Washington on Friday next week, and I'd be happy to sit down in your office and show you what it's all about. This guy, Semyon Mogilevich, he was our #1 arms dealer when we were going to war against the Russians in the 80s. And Semyon Mogilevich is from the Ukraine. He actually runs the mafia that is basically across Russia and the Ukraine. So take a deep look into what the Americans have been doing in that region for well over 30 to 40 years. And let's have a real discussion on the actual corruption that's been going on in that region. Because for what you're talking about, it's very unclear as to where it's going.
Well, Mr. Peterson, what about that? If we look at the meeting John Kerry had a meeting with several opposition figures, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, Vitaly Klitschko, and Petro Poroshenko, on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. Isn't that interference in a sovereign country's affairs?
No, I would be delighted to talk about hegemony in the area. We are not arguing about hegemony of the Russians or hegemony of Americans in the area. I am arguing for liberty for the Ukrainians in the area.
Can you answer, then can you, in context with liberty for Ukraine, can you answer the question that I posed to you? Can you answer the question that I posed to you? What exactly does that mean when you have the Secretary of State of your country meeting with the top opposition leaders prior to all of this? And we also, of course, we have the leaked conversation with Victoria Nuland. And, of course, we have McCain, who addressed the opposition actually in Kiev. Do you not call this meddling in the affairs of a sovereign country?
Exactly.
A Secretary of State has as an obligation to meet with parties and to discuss. Please don't put me in a position of defending Kerry or the Obama administration here, because I quite agree with you in principle that they have been very flawed, not in what they have done or attempted to do, but what they have failed to do.
So you're saying what they have done, I just want to get clarification on my question. So you're saying what they have done has not been interference at all. Is that what you're saying, though, Mr. Peterson?
It certainly has not been.
Okay.
No.
All
What
right.
has
Mr. Ricard,
happened
your take,
is
Mr.
there,
Ricard.
or is
If we look
there-
at a situation,
is there,
Mr. Ricard,
is
if we
there
had,
not
for
a
example, the
treaty?
Occupy
Is
movement
there
that had
a
taken place in the
treaty
United
or
States,
not?
and if we had had some Russian politicians going out there in various cities and addressing these protesters who were in the United States, what type of reaction do you think we would have seen from Washington?
That is a great point. I mean, what if you had Russian influence here and the Occupy movement here in the United States, and you had Russians over here funding billions of dollars to the Occupy movement? Give me a break, Mr. Peterson. I mean, the facts remain is that you have a society, you know, look at the Krugerrand. And the Krugerrand was created back in the 70s that was manipulating not only that area that we're talking about today, but the same guys that we're dealing with today, the result of those Nicholas Deek and his son Leslie Deek, who work at CIA think tanks downtown in Washington, D.C. I'd love to come and educate you on how incredibly corrupt your government is today and has been for the last 40 years.
And on that note, I'm so sorry, but I have to interrupt you because we are out of time. So sorry, Mr. Scott Ricard and Mr. Frederick Peterson, but we're out of time. I thank both of you for being with us right here in the debate. And viewers, thank you. Join us same place, same time tomorrow. I'm Marzia Hashemi signing out from Tehran. Goodbye.